But we're going to start by just introducing ourselves really quick. Let's start with Fletch, and then just kind of, I don't know, you don't see the same order that I see. But tell us a little bit about, like, first give us your name, your experience you have with freelancing, any just quick elevator pitch you want to give us. So I'll let
Yeah,
you take it away, Fletch.
my name is Fletch, Stephen Fletcher. I just started freelancing recently around 2007 and started my company. The main idea was, there weren't enough people doing microservices. That was my thing. I was trying to promote that. And working for a company where you're in the bureaucracy, it's tough to get your voice heard, even if you are the manager, which I was at that point, managing a team and leading a team. The product people don't really care. They just want you to do the same thing that they've been doing the whole time. So I'm like, microservices. I'm going to go out and preach to the world. So now I'm a microservice preacher, and that's why I started freelancing.
Sounds good. Jeff, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jeff French, and I'm the principal consultant at MoonSwitch. And I got into freelancing, I guess, around 2013 or so, after kind of joined the corporate world, and then jumped out into a startup. And then when that washed out and they couldn't afford to pay me anymore, I was like, oh, I need money. Okay, great. Someone needs some work. I will do some work for them. And I've just been kind of independent and freelancing pretty much ever since.
Awesome. How about you, Jeremy?
Hey, my name's Jeremy Green. I first got started in business in 1999 when a business partner of mine and I opened a development shop here in Norman. We did that for about 10 years, and then he took off to go inherit his family business. And I had to figure out what the hell I was going to do. So at that point, I just kind of fell into freelancing by accident. Just started picking up one-off jobs here and there, and then that has turned into a really pretty successful career.
That's great. What about you, Ryan Haig? Got two Ryans. We got to use last names for you guys.
Yeah, apparently your name has to start with a J or an R to be in freelancing. Just kidding. I did a little career engineering. I started with regular jobs like most people, and I tried different size companies. I've actually had three companies. So in 2000, three friends of mine started a company doing network engineering, and then 6 weeks later, one of the friends left, and there were two of us. And then 3 months later, all the work I kept selling was development work, and my friend was a SAN guy, which is a kind of networking for storage. And he left too, and it was just me. And I ran that company for 4 years, and I moved to Oklahoma and had no clients and got a regular job. So that was in 2003. My first freelancing company failed. And the failures you learn a lot from. So then the second time I did it, I was just solo. And then I for one company, I had one client, and then I took a full-time job with them, and that was the end of that company. And now this time, I'm currently still at Hague Software, and I got all the way up to 7 employees, and now I'm back down to 2. So I've got a lot of hard knocks to teach you guys from, I guess. And now I'm doing this weird software training, like full-time software training. I guess that's the way. That's what I fell into. So part of it is following your market. So that's my history.
Okay, and I'm not considering myself a panelist. I'm just moderating, but I will say that I did freelancing for about 3 years. I was working a full-time job, went down to part-time, decided to just do something different for a little while, and now I'm back at that same job. So I have maybe a slightly different take on this. I notice that all of y'all are talking about your own consulting agency. Is that right? And all four of y'all. So one of the questions I had was like, how does that compare? I guess to like when you say free, like, do you consider yourself a freelancer? How would you compare freelancing versus running a consulting firm? Do you see differences there? How would you describe freelancing? And I'll let anybody just jump in.
Yeah, I'll say freelancing has a couple different sides. I always break it into consulting and contracting. Consulting being I'm more so telling people what to do and showing them the ropes, and contracting is they say we need this thing and you just program. You're not really trying to lead them necessarily. But freelancing, the term I think is a lot more of an individual term. So I'll take contracts that are just freelancing, just come to me and I'll do some programming for you, and then you pay me 1099. I think all freelancing, I think we'd all agree is means 1099 if you define it in a very short term. But then a lot of times they'll come to me, it'll be overwhelming for me, or it'll be something like bigger or something that someone else can handle. And so then I'll bring the company in general in, we'll split things up or bring more people in or whatever. So contracting C2C, company to company, is slightly different, I think, than direct freelancing, where it's just, they're just talking to you. That's my idea of what freelancing is.
So Fletch, you threw in a couple of terms there. You want to explain 1099 and C2C for people?
Yeah, I'll throw out since I'm defining my ideas, I'll tell you what I believe these things mean. So C2C, well, freelancing means that they're hiring Stephen Fletcher, and probably on the check, unless you tell them otherwise, they'll cut a check to me with no taxes taken out. It's just, you charge $10 an hour, you work for 10 hours, here's $100, something like that. Don't charge $10 an hour, by the way. And then so C2C would mean they're talking to my company, and in that type of case, I would say, you're hiring Gen Studios, you're expecting that I'm going to be doing the work. However, if I'm out for a week, on vacation, like Jeff or whatever, and having my birthday and having a good time, I'll probably give it to someone else. The work's not going to stop. You're going to keep paying us. That's more C2C type stuff. 1099 pretty much just means they're not taking taxes out. You need to manage your own taxes. I think there's some other questions that we'll get into of one of the downsides of freelancing being you need to manage your own taxes.
So it's kind of a little semantic detail, but I think worth talking about. I generally try to never use the term freelancing or freelancer when I'm talking to a client or a prospect, primarily because it has the word free in it, which is close to cheap, and people tend to think of freelancers as being cheap. So I always say that I'm a consultant, because that is the other end of that spectrum, and people expect consultants to be expensive, and people expect consultants to solve expensive problems and be worth being expensive. And how you present yourself matters. And so I think it does matter that you don't want to go to a prospect and tell them that you're a freelancer. You want to tell them you're a contractor or a consultant. And that's about managing expectations and kind of presenting yourself in the best light to have the best reception with your prospect or your client.
Yeah, I'll tag up on that as well. With the way I kind of think of it, and again, I definitely agree with what Jeremy said about I don't ever use the term freelancer when I talk to a client, but in terms of how you think about what it is you're doing as a business, the two avenues in this side are kind of freelance or agency, and I don't think that those two are mutually exclusive. As Fletch said, like sometimes you can be having a foot in each side of those waters, and like with Moonswitch, I kind of started out as what would really be considered a freelancer, because it was just me just taking on work that I could do and trading my hours for money every week. And I've got Moonswitch to a point now where, I'm kind of trying to transition over into agency and bring in more people and kind of create more of an agency type of setup with it. And I think that both of those are actually okay. It's just important to sit down and, assess what your goals are for why you're doing this. Because the idea of freelancing where you're just solo all the time can be a fantastic way to build a lifestyle business that pays for exactly the life that you want to have. And it's, has, all of the benefits of, being your own boss without any of the kind of things about having to be someone else's boss, which is a different kind of thing, or be responsible for someone else's, livelihood. And if you make the conscious decision that you want to go agency, it's good to just kind of know which way you're trying to grow your business from freelance into agency, because you're almost never going to start as an agency unless you just start it with a bunch of friends all at once. But you start out as a freelancer and maybe get some success with it, and then you kind of decide at this fork in the road, do I want to just continue this path that's been working really well for me, or do I want to try to do this other thing? And like I said, I think both are absolutely valid paths. It's just a matter of kind of doing some soul searching and figuring out what it is that you want to do.
Yeah, having been sort of through the process a couple of times, I would maybe like to emphasize something that maybe it came out in a few of your explanations, especially Jeremy's. If you are committed to building a business, like you've already chosen, I want to build a business that does something and it has a brand and it has an identity, and it, some work is what you are going to take and some work is what you're not going to take. That's a project, right? And that thing you're building is not freelancing. That that has its own identity. And my company got to that point for a while, and I hired a sales guy really early, and it grew in a direction that I didn't want to go because someone else was involved in the sales process, and it got really big doing work that I didn't love, right? So making a real business first requires you to have a sense that you want to do what that business is doing, right? Like it's a thing, right? So freelancing is a more of an experimental process where you take this work and see if that's what you want to do, and you take that work and you see what that's going to do. It can be short term while you're setting your business up. Just use your own personal name, like I think Fletch said, and it can be whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. If you could take a networking project, and then you could take a database project, and then you could take a project management project, who cares, right? But as soon as you make a business, you got to narrow it down, and the business has to be about something, or else nobody's ever going to buy from it, right? And that's kind of what Jeremy is getting at, is the higher value things where you take responsibility for larger outcomes, and it matters whether your brand succeeds or fails, because nobody's going to hire that brand again if they made a giant mess at the last project. Like, that's a level of your personal commitment to a particular kind of work, right? So as you are exploring working in a non-traditional job, right, and when you go hunting for your own projects, freelancing can be the more experimental version of that, and you're not going to make as much money. That's just the way it is. You're going to make more than if you work a W-2 job, which is the tax way of handling like a regular employee relationship, but you're not going to make as much as if you have a brand and an established reputation, right? And that's sort of a spectrum.
So for people who are working the full-time W-2 job and thinking like, okay, is freelancing for me? Like, how would you help them answer that question? And then the actual getting started, like, how do you start as a full-time employee? If you think this is something you want to do, where would you go?
I think one of the important questions to ask yourself is if you're interested in business as a general concept, because part of freelancing and consulting is running a business. And if you're just a programmer and you want to just have your head in the editor all day, every day, and you never want to look at a profit and loss statement, and you never want to look at a spreadsheet, and you never want to make a sales call, freelancing may not be a good fit for you, because you need to do those things to have a successful business. And I tell you this from personal experience, because I don't like looking at spreadsheets and profit and loss statements and making sales calls. And that's made my life as a consultant and freelancer harder than it would have been if I was into those things. It's not to say that you can't possibly make a business if you're not into those things, but you need to at least have the capacity to suck it up and do those things when you have to, or you're going to starve. And if you can't even fathom doing those things, then, a full-time job's nothing to scoff at, and if you love doing what you're doing and you find a job that lets you do what you love to do all day, every day, more power to you. That's great.
Yeah, I say I spend 16-ish hours a week on doing business stuff. That is, talking to all the existing clients and, how are we doing? How you guys doing? What can we do better? Having all that type of interaction with all of our other clients, and then doing, make sure paychecks are running. Now, I say this to start off because I do spend a lot of time on that type of stuff. But some of the listeners now or in the future will say, I just wanted to talk about freelancing, like Jeremy was getting at. I just want to be a freelancer. So, you go to websites and you say, put your name in there, and maybe someone will contact you to do some work. And you're like, that's all I want. I don't want to talk about all this consulting and business running stuff. But you'll learn really quick that even just doing that, you have to file your taxes slightly differently when you do that. So you might not be just going to H&R Block. Maybe you will. You might be going to more of a private person. And turns out you got to track those things, weekly or monthly, so that you can report your 1099 taxes biannually or something. And so it turns out you need to, and it just grows. So if you think you want to be a freelancer, like Jeremy said, just head in the IDE programming. There's going to be some amount of time you're building a business, whether you call it consulting and contracting, or you just say, no, I just want to be a freelancer. You're building a business, and your business, you can do business as just your name, but there's more tax benefits if you incorporate or as an LLC or as a corporation. There's different tax benefits depending on what you want.
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. I would say if you are thinking about getting into this, or if you have kind of started and especially if you're kind of moonlighting with some freelancing, it's going to have much less effect on those things in the beginning, when it's a smaller amount of your time and therefore probably a smaller amount of money. But if you're really thinking about going, full-time freelancing or something like that, you should probably find a tax pro and talk to them. Like, we've all got our own different experiences with it, but we're not accountants or lawyers. And you should definitely seek out somebody who you can explain your financial situation to and your goals, and they'll tell you this is how you should go about it to minimize the amount of business work that you have to do, but still make sure that you're not painting yourself into a corner financially with what you're doing, because that is one thing. As soon as you start freelancing, you start finding that the rates you can get, and if you take those rates and multiply them by 40 hours a week and 50 weeks a year, you go, oh wow, that's way more than my W-2 job. You definitely want to talk to a tax person about that and make sure that you understand what the implications of that are.
And to that point, I would say that taking an hourly rate that you can get somebody to agree to as a freelancer and multiplying that by 40 weeks a year, and then or 40 hours a week, and then by 50 weeks a year, and thinking that's going to be what you make a year, that's a recipe for misery and disappointment, because it doesn't work that way. Because what we were talking about previously about spending 16 hours a week doing prospecting and all the business side of things means that you don't have 40 hours a week to spend on doing the work that is billable. And there's going to be some weeks where you don't do any billable work because things have dried up, or you're just chasing down prospect after prospect for a week. And so the math doesn't work out that way. So make sure you don't fool yourself and think, oh my God, I'm going to make 4 times what I make now if I just start being a freelancer.
Yeah.
Well, and since you're your own boss, and I've found this only in my 3rd try, you want to set aside off time. There's nobody's going to give you vacation. Your clients are hungry. So when you do have a lot of work, you have to. So I actually plan ahead and block out a whole week at a time and say, I'm not working that week. And I let my clients know, and they don't care. They're like, okay. Like, it turns out that they understand that, right? So you can design your work life to be sustainable, but that does mean taking a hit on number of billable hours. And I wanted to add on to where Jeff was talking about, and Jeremy in a way, about the work you're good at and the work you have to do that's overhead. I have now got a situation on my 3rd try where I subcontract to a couple of people, and I employ a full-time business manager to the tune of $60,000 a year. I pay her $60,000 a year to do all the stuff that I'm bad at, which allows me to bill hours at the rate I can bill. And now she does the invoicing, she does the contract negotiation, she does the accounting and the interaction with the tax professionals. So I have a CPA and a lawyer. She handles all of making sure they're paid on time and the meetings are scheduled. It took a long time to find somebody that was good and to teach her the way I wanted things to go. But it is worth every penny. In fact, I gave her a raise from 40 to 60 2 years ago because of how much she makes me be able to make. I definitely, that's a profitable move for me. Right? Even though I'm spending $60,000 of my money every year and my time on her and sending her to Coursera courses and stuff, it is absolutely wonderful to have somebody take care of the things you're not so good at, and to call me on things like, hey, did you call that client back? Because, I'm in the middle of doing my technical work, and it's easy to forget to call a client back and then not have a contract 3 months from now. Right? So having other people in your business, it takes time to find what they are. So don't start with a W-2 employee, right? Start with people you can hire part-time or get help from. But using other people's strengths to fill in your weaknesses is it's hard to make yourself do right away, but it's very important in your long-term 10 to 20 years. Is finding people to plug into your plan that help do the things you're terrible at, because I'm terrible at a lot of stuff.
We do have a few questions in the chat, and one of them is relating to this, so I want to bring it up. Someone asked, how do you balance marketing, looking for work, and doing the work? And so I think you've all been speaking to that, but I wonder if you have anything specific to that you want to add.
So freelancing often comes with what's known as the feast and famine cycle. where things are really good for a while and then taper off. And when you're in a famine part of the cycle, it's real easy to find time to do marketing and prospecting because you're not doing the work that you want to get paid to do. So you have to go find that work. And I think the challenge is when you get into a feast part of the cycle where things are going really well and you've got lots of work, it's easy to slack off and stop prospecting and stop marketing. And then when the current project that you're on dries up, you fall off that slope back into a famine cycle, and we'll try to kickstart that marketing and prospecting again. And the important thing is to remember to keep marketing and prospecting when you're in a feast cycle and set aside time to do it, even if you don't feel like you need the work this week or next month. It's important to keep that flywheel moving so that when you do need it, it's easy to latch onto and keep your momentum going.
Jeremy, can you follow up and talk about when you say set aside time, what do you actually do?
Part of it is just being intentional with commitments that you make to clients and not telling clients, hey, I expect to spend 40 hours next week working on your project. Or, even worse, I expect to spend 50 or 60 hours next week working on your project. You want to kind of cap time that you commit to clients at maybe 25 hours a week or 30 hours a week so that you're building in time to work on your business instead of working in your business.
Yeah, because if you do make those commitments, then you still have to do that other work. So all of a sudden you've now committed yourself to 50 and 60 hours because you're doing 40 hours of client work, but you still have to do what's required to keep your business running.
Yeah.
And I think, I was going to say, I think that another, to tag up on that, you can actually use the strategy that Ryan was just talking about a minute ago, especially during the feast cycle. It's a great time if you need to if content marketing is what keeps your business going and you don't have time to write blog posts, contract out some people during the feast time. The money's flowing in, use that to pay somebody to keep that part going, or pay somebody, and then when the famine time comes, you can take over that work yourself if the money's not flowing as well. So.
Yeah, along those lines, there's another question about low cost or no cost marketing ideas. And so I think you just brought up a couple there. Anybody have more suggestions?
Kind of as a umbrella category, working in public, whether that is writing blog posts about challenges that you're coming up against, speaking at user groups, speaking at conferences. All of those are good ways to kind of demonstrate that you have expertise in your field. And it's a good way to get in front of people that might want to hire you. Ideally, if you can find a user group or a conference where most of the attendees are your ideal buyer, that's the kind of group that you would ideally want to go talk to. It's less ideal to go talk to a group of your peers because they're probably not going to hire you. If I go and speak at a conference, the chances that I'm going to get a good lead from that turns into a job is lower than if I'm speaking at for a group of business owners who are trying to transition from brick and mortar style, operation to online. I've got a much higher chance there of getting leads that are going to turn into real work. That's not to say that speaking to peers doesn't work. I've gotten a number of jobs from speaking at like RailsConf, and that turns out really well. And it also kind of establishes your credentials. I've had a client that I'm working for right now say to me in interviews, I saw your talk. It's obvious you know what you're talking about. We don't need to do a technical interview. We just need to see if we can find a way to work together that's going to be mutually beneficial. And so that, helps sidestep a lot of the dance that you do with clients and prospects. So yeah, that's a great way that is no cost other than, your effort and time of getting out in front of people.
I think there's this can match up with the previous question too, that how do you get into or maybe this, I just read ahead. I don't remember exactly. How do you get into your first freelance? If you're doing W-2, I think Ryan was talking about this. The client doesn't care if you're in 1099. If you say, next month I'm taking a week off, they don't care. As a matter of fact, they frequently don't care about what you charge them either. You could say $1 million an hour. They're like, well, it's in the budget. They don't really have. It's surprising how much they don't care if you really get down to it. But when you're in a W-2 job, you can very well make them your first client. You can say, I'm leaving this. I'm going to be pursuing freelancing or consulting. Like everyone else said, you don't want to really use the word freelancer. But I'd like to continue working on the projects. I already have domain knowledge. I'm working on this stuff. So if you guys would like to transition me to pay me 1099 instead of W-2, that'd be really good. A lot of the work that I get, my marketing, you might say, is that type of thing. I haven't done real W-2 in a long time, but I have done contracting that I found through another company, through a headhunting agency or something like that, where I've taken a little bit of a pay cut and done a 6-month contract. But maybe luckily or just based on my skill, they say they want to continue for another year for maybe some other side project or whatever else you really let's continue for a year. So I'll tell them, okay, I don't say let's keep going through this headhunter company. Let's transition to me directly. That raises the price for me, which also happens to cut the price for them. Meet somewhere in the middle. And so that's a good way of marketing. And then that's a good word of mouth. I think just about all my clients are word of mouth. Someone told someone else or asked, hey, can you have some references to another company? And then the managers, managers don't stick around forever. So a manager you worked with, they leave and go to another company, then that's a good in for another company. So
Yeah.
free marketing is word of mouth. I know I'm going a little bit long for this answer, but I'm gonna throw this out there. If you are in a situation where you're like, well, none of my managers like me and I'm not sure I have a high level skill, I can't do talks and stuff like that, I don't have a high level of skills, then freelancing, you can disagree with me if you want, everyone else, freelancing might not be for you. Freelancing, you should be at the top of your game, or at least in one skill area that you're going to be selling. You shouldn't go out freelancing when you can't tell the customer, I'm confident this is exactly the way that you need to do this based on your concerns, and I know exactly how to do things. If you're like, oh, I'm pretty good and I can Google it, I don't really do talks, I'm not really comfortable talking to people, and it's not really for you. So marketing could be very word of mouth, and if you can't make those connections and stuff, then that's one of the signs that maybe you're not ready yet. Work on that a little bit.
I'd add on to that. You want to treat sales and marketing and relationship building as studyable skills. I actually took a Coursera course on marketing and learned about segmentation, targeting, and positioning when I started my third company, and it drastically changed the way I approach clients. Like part of getting contracts, it seems counterintuitive. Part of getting contracts is refusing them. Part of getting contracts is straight talking to people about, this is the kind of work I want to do, which means you need to think yourself about the kind of work you want to do, whether you want to work not just technically, but maybe you want to work for nonprofits, maybe you want to work for military, maybe you think of who you want to work for as well as what you want to do. And then if it's not a match, you say it's not a match and you move on. Like part of finding the best work is turning down things that are kind of off center and I guess I could do this project. It would make me, I could buy dinner next week, but I have to take a pay cut and I'm going to hate the work. You're never going to be happy you took that project. Even though it seems like you really need the money right now, you're going to hate freelancing and go get a regular job. I mean, in the end, right? So part of studying sales and marketing is treating the process of finding what you're going to do next as something you can engineer and something you can study and something you can improve your skills on.
And to kind of build on that, and also to go back to one of the earlier questions about kind of how to get into it or figure out if it's for you. And Jeff has mentioned mood lighting, and I think that's a great way to do it. Like start picking up some small contracts when you still have your full-time job, because that's going to let you explore, do you like doing sales calls with people? Do you like the process of taking a prospect through that process and closing a sale with them? Do you enjoy kind of managing yourself on that work that you're doing for that client? You can explore all of that stuff while you've still got your safety net of your full-time job. And it also that also will let you turn down jobs that aren't a good fit for you at first, because you can really, I've seen people get into kind of, they start poorly because they decide, you know what, I'm done with my job. I'm going to quit. I'm going to start freelancing tomorrow. And then they don't have a good nest egg built up. They don't have, a long runway that allows them to have the freedom to turn down jobs. And so they feel pressured to take the very first comes across their plate, even if it's something that isn't a good fit for them, with a client that's going to be nothing but trouble. It's going to be slow to pay. And that first bad contract kind of just sets them down this spiral of failure that is almost impossible to pull out of once you're in that, because that client that's not a good fit is taking up all your time, and you can't go find somebody that is a good client that's going to pay well, that's going to value what you're doing. And those two things are pulling in opposite directions. And if you let the bad client get a hold of your time and get your time committed, it's really hard to dig out of that.
Yeah. And I think that to the point that both Jeremy and Ryan were kind of making, especially about being able to say no to work, one of the real keys there is to kind of find your niche, find the thing that you're like, hey, this is the thing that I can really solve for companies. And it's a common problem that people have, and that makes it, number one, it makes it way easier to figure out how to market, who to market to, what to do for that marketing. And then when you get into those conversations, it lets you have a very high level of confidence that, like, hey, yes, here is the exact problem you're actually having, and I can solve that problem for you. It will take this long and cost this much money, because that's the kind of things that clients want to hear, and help you close those deals. And now that doesn't necessarily mean, like, it's really good to have a pretty tight niche of a problem that you solve, because that's what gets you in to clients. But often what you'll find is you kind of get into a client, and then your breadth of work will tend to expand as you do good work for them, because you're going to be into their business problems and their technical problems, and you're going to start seeing what's happening in there, and hearing the conversations they're having, saying, oh, well, actually, yeah, I can help you with that, and yes, I can help you with that too, because you find things that, hey, this is a client I do want to work for, there's people I do like to work with, they pay well, and I do have a skill set to do these other things, even though it's not necessarily my niche. And that's a really great way to make sure that you can kind of stay busy with current clients, and not have to constantly be searching for new ones to solve the one tiny little niche problem that you have. And the other side of that spectrum, and a mistake I made at the beginning, and that I see a lot of people make when they try to start freelancing or consulting or contracting, is sort of the jack of all trades approach. Like, oh yes, the generalist, I can do everything, I can solve all problems if you have any kind of problem. And when your reach is too broad, it is a race to the bottom on rates. You become a resource, and somebody else will do some of those things for $10 cheaper than you will, and your expertise doesn't matter anymore. And so you want to avoid that. Even if it feels like you're limiting your market, you're actually increasing your chance of landing good work.
Yes.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. One of them is, do you have any idols or role models that have succeeded in what you're wanting to do the right way? So can you suggest maybe some blogs for us to read, or people we can look up and Google and learn more about this?
One of my favorite people is Mark Seaman. He wrote the book on dependency injection, and just because that's one of the soapboxes I get on is dependency injection, he also has some things that he backtracked in his book. So don't go reading the book and think it's 100%. Read his blogs, read a lot of the ways he does things. He makes a lot of his money contracting. He's been a lot more functional recently, which is amazing. That's what I like. A lot more of a functional developer, and surprisingly so has Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob's been doing a lot more functional programming, and side note, functional programming is amazing. But he writes a lot of blogs, and he gets paid to do a lot of talking, which then of course makes him get more work because he has a lot of talking videos out there. So Mark Seaman, if you Google him, you'll see his website Ploeh, Ploeh .dk or something like that. But yeah, he's a really good one I look up to.
Yeah, and feel free to post these links in our OKC Sharp Slack channel so we can look at them later. Anybody else have one?
There's a ton of good info from a guy named Brennan Dunn who has kind of a website and sort of an overall brand called Double Your Freelancing, where he gives tons of great information, courses, and even like straight up resources you can purchase for, marketing automation and, how to kind of niche down and market your services that you want to sell at a higher rate. And it's all about figuring out how to consistently increase your freelancing or consulting rates with clients, and just kind of building on success from that. So doubleyourfreelancing.com is a good one.
Two people that I would mention that I think have interesting businesses. One is a guy named Nate Burkopek, and he does Rails performance consulting and has built a nice little niche of producing a lot of content around Rails performance that has then led to him being able to charge lots of money to help very high profile clients optimize the performance of their Rails apps. And then another one is a guy named Mike Perham, who is the creator of an open source library called Sidekick. And he's done a very good job of kind of taking this open source library, building a pro version on top of it, and then also having a consulting arm where he can go in and help companies set it up correctly and kind of iron out their messy back-end jobs pipelines. And those are both, both of those guys are still remain fairly technical most of the time and have managed to kind of parlay that technical expertise into a larger and more valuable business opportunity.
So I'm going to take a different way to answer this question. If you want to know who I read, go to goodreads.com. I'm on there. And I read way too many people to answer this question with, and I've gotten a lot of value from a lot of surprising places. So follow your nose with reading. I'm going to take a different perspective, is that you're in the right place right now. Look at your local community and find mentors. I'm going to take a risk and give a plug to a mentor that I got a lot out of in the local community. His name is Shane Kempton, and he runs Phase 2 Consulting. And you just ask him to breakfast, or I just asked him to breakfast, and he said sure. And we went to breakfast, and I asked him questions about building a business. Find somebody who you think is successful in things that you're maybe having trouble with, and have the guts to just ask them. One of you, I'm not going to call you out because you didn't say I could, but just reached out to me on Slack and sent me a message. Cool. You'd be surprised. Most people who are on this journey got help from other people ahead of them on this journey. There's a guy in Austin who tried to hire me for his startup in 2012, and they ended up getting, I didn't take it, but I would be very rich if I did back then. He sold to VMware for $150 million after that, and I still call him and ask him random questions, and he takes my call and answers them. So look for people that you know are somewhere ahead of you, and it doesn't matter how far, and just see if they'll talk to you. And you'll be surprised how much you learn that you didn't even think you needed to learn, because they have been down the road and they tripped and fell and can tell you where the roots are that you're going to trip over.
Yep.
Yeah, those are some great points. Another question is kind of the opposite of that. How do you find, when you are ready to go from solo to an agency, how do you find qualified subcontractors? How do you know that they're qualified? How do you know that they'll be a good fit? Where do you find them?
I'll tag up on that one, as that's one I've been kind of working through. And a big one is going to be just trying to make sure to work your network, right? The people that you've worked with that have done good work, at maybe at W-2 jobs, maybe at other clients. Keep your network open. Connect with these people on LinkedIn, on Slack, wherever you are. Even if they're not contractors, but they're W-2 people, they might be looking to start making that move, and they might want to start doing it by subcontracting work out, from you. And so work your network is definitely the first one I would suggest.
Jeff, I want to follow up with something you said on marketing. Precision. You mentioned being precise in what work you're looking for. If you're going to find a subcontractor, be precise in what help you want, not only so that you can find the subcontractor that actually does that, but so that they know what the heck to do for you, so that they can be successful, right? The precision, and it's hard. I'm not saying, oh yeah, just be precise. You have to really think, well, what work do I want to give them, and what work do I not want to give them, and how am I going to let them know they're being successful? And that relationship between you and the sub is very easy to mess up, and then you've made an enemy of someone in your local community who could be a great help to you, or at least they don't want to work with you anymore because you're hard to work with. Like I've made that mistake.
Yeah.
and it matters in a long term that you build this skill of delegating in a way that's likely to succeed.
Okay, so we talked about not taking bad projects, but like, what are some red flags? How do you know ahead of time this is going to be a bad project?
So for me, like one of the things that I've had problems with and that I've come to see that I always need to head off is people that pay late or don't pay. And the biggest way that I get around that now is I require payment up front. And if the client is unwilling to pay up front, that's generally a red flag for me. If they try to negotiate down on rates really aggressively, that is probably a red flag. You can often kind of get vibes that they are going to be very controlling or micromanaging. That's a red flag. If you've set up a meeting to talk with them and they just don't show up, and then later say, oh, hey, let's just reschedule with like no explanation of, we had a medical emergency and I just couldn't even give you the heads up that I was going to miss that meeting. And I'm so sorry. Can we reschedule? That's a red flag. If they just kind of don't seem to treat you with respect that you hope to have from people, that's a red flag. Okay, I'm done. I'll go.
Yeah, I was going to follow up a little bit on that. It's really hard to figure out if it's going to be a bad project, because on paper they're going to say, for me, we need somebody moving us into the cloud doing microservices or serverless development, and automatically I'm like, there's no way this is going to be bad. But you find out about those things later on, that they're going to be paying late, or they're maybe no fault of their own. They're accounting departments, not up to snuff or something, and it's just more work for you. It's tough. I'm just sort of echoing a little bit of what Jeremy said, that it's tough up front to figure that out. So you can put a little bit of guards into place, but as much as you do that, it's tough to not get a bad one. As long as the work is fun for me, microservices or something like that, I don't mind if some of the other stuff is bad. You can straighten it out, or unfortunately sometimes leave a customer and say, no, this is too much. So
I'm going to answer with a couple of basics, real basics. So I have a client who pays me on net 60. So that means I send an invoice, 60 days later, I get paid. And I'm very happy with this client because we've built up the trust over time and they pay me very high rates. So that sort of relationship requires the client to earn your trust. So you don't take long payment terms and you don't take flat rate work. And I really want to warn you against the temptation to take a flat rate project. They're very risky, right? So it's not that you never take them. It's that they require you to trust your client at a high level. So don't do that until they've earned that trust. And then you can make a lot of profit on flat rate work or on long payment terms because you've got that trust with your client, right? So it's not that any kind of work is absolutely always red flag, but you got a new relationship with somebody, you don't know how they're going to behave. So you build in very short, so invoice every week or every 2 weeks. And if they're late, you actually have to stop working. Even if it's week 2 and they're under immense deadline pressure, you're like, call your accounting department. This is a new client for me. I can't risk it. I can't keep building up a higher bill for you not to pay, right? And
Yeah,
you don't
that's a
have to
really
say it
important
that.
point.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to say that's a really important point. If it's the minute that they've missed a payment, stop work until they make the payment. Just all the time.
Yep.
No exceptions.
similarly, that the way you deliver is a big part of it, because if you're working on a big delivery project and it's pretty much done, but they haven't paid you in the last 1 or 2 invoices, if it's already on their computer, you've already delivered to them. They don't have to pay you. What's the point? But and sometimes you can't get away from that. You're going to be working in their systems on their VMs or whatever. But sometimes you're working in your own systems and you deliver to them bi-weekly, or you have your weekly updates that you're discussing with them what's going on. Sometimes you'll deliver at the end of a project, so that'll really motivate them to pay you. If you haven't delivered anything to them yet, and they're like, Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to mention really quick that in Slack, there's a pricing work channel where they talk about all these sorts of things. We may not have time to get into lots of details, but I do want to mention there's a small community of people there chatting about this type of stuff.
I would also, to tag up on that, one way that you can kind of build some protections and maybe weed out a potentially bad client is I would recommend, if you can get away from it, don't do hourly work. Negotiate a weekly rate, because when you negotiate a weekly rate, it lets your client think of you more in the way that they think of their salaried employees. Hey, I'm paying you X amount a week for an expectation of these deliverables. And it lets you get more, that's both of you and the client get more focused on outcomes than on hours. Because with hourly billing, and this is one thing that bad clients will do, you'll find them saying, I noticed that this Jira ticket that you did, you billed 1.75 hours for it, but it seems more like a 1 hour task, and now you're negotiating over 45 minutes worth of your rate. And that is not a valuable use of your time or the client's time. So it saves your client from that too, because it keeps them from that temptation of trying to say, well, nitpick every single hour, and lets them focus up on saying, okay, wait a second, you said that you're going to deliver this in 2 weeks for this amount of money because it's a weekly rate. Great, I'm happy with that outcome, and you delivered it, and we're all good. And it also builds in a little bit of flexibility because you can establish with your client, some weeks I may be working 20 to 25 hours for that rate. Some weeks I may be working 35 to 40 hours if there's a little more to deliver that week, but you're negotiating a rate that you're comfortable with, and then just managing the expectation around deliverables.
I'm just going to follow up on that, since the last freelancing talk, I forget who gave it a couple weeks ago, said something similar, and I agree with it, that you want to, that's a red flag type thing, charging hourly. However, just from my experience, all of my clients have so far all been hourly rates since 2007, and I've never been in that situation yet. Not to say it doesn't happen. Maybe I've just been lucky, but I'll charge essentially 40 hours a week, because that's what I work. Sometimes I work 40 more, a lot more than that. But I charge what I work. Yeah, don't do that. That's I know, Ryan. But I've never had that problem. So especially if you're new to freelancing, I wouldn't be afraid to pick up that kind of job if that's all you have. But it's something that I've been hearing a lot of people say, and maybe something I'll put more thought into in the future, even though I haven't been burned yet. So I don't want people to shy away from that kind of contract, but it's probably a good thing to look out for.
Well, we're getting a little bit close to 12:30, so a couple more comments on that, and then we'll go to the next thing. So, did you have something, Ryan?
I was just gonna say, it sounds a little bit like you get a lot of say over I mean, you do at the beginning of a negotiation. What I've found is, the larger the company, and I like to work for large companies because they have big problems and they have big budgets, right? You have to understand their procurement process, which is a fancy word for how they buy stuff, which sometimes involves a project management charter. Sometimes it involves the accounting department to have capital versus expense budget. So the more you can, especially while you're there, to get to know the people that are setting aside money for you, the way that they actually do that, like it might require hourly against different projects in their time tracking system. That's part of your engineering. It's just like figuring out how you're going to use Rails, figuring out how you're going to get paid and how they're going to decide to acquire your work will pay off for your next project. So sometimes you don't get to pick. Sometimes it's the way they buy stuff, and that's what you're stuck with.
We did have a question from someone about freelancing after retirement. Do you have anything specific? It might not apply to you all, but you might have something to add about short jobs, short quick from a website, but specifically freelancing to supplement your income after you retire. Do you have anything to add on that?
I would say be careful. Projects that you think are short and quick have a way, just like every other project you've done, whether you were freelancing or working, for a W-2 company, scope tends to creep. Things, so I would say your best friend there, if you're not looking to give somebody 40 hours a week anymore, is really negotiate scope pretty hard up front on each phase of the project, and make sure you're not committing to more than what you actually want to work if you're only looking to work a little bit to supplement income.
I'd, I'd take there's another strategy. I like to play to my strengths, and I think you should play to your strengths. If you're retired, you probably have some kind of reliable income already, right? So you don't need, you can deal with the feast and famine thing. You might have some freedom to travel that some of us don't, because I have children, right? And I used to travel, and it's tough on the children. So look for work that will handle the risk you're talking about. I worked with a couple of retired consultants once who were really good at AS400 programming, because that's what they had done their whole career, and they flew from client to client as subcontractors for a larger company who found all the work for them, and they only worked 8 or 10 weeks a year, whenever they, and they would know 6 weeks ahead of time that there was going to be a project. They'd go fly somewhere, do that project, and leave. And so they had found a really good fit for their lifestyle. So part of finding the good fit for your lifestyle is dealing with your constraints, but part of it is playing to your strengths, playing to the things that you have that I don't have.
So not unique to the question about retirement freelancing, but just an important point that I want to throw out there is that to be successful at freelancing, one of the things that's crucial is to not underprice your services, because that will lead you into that downward spiral that I talked about a little bit earlier. And it can be counterintuitive, because you can think, oh, if I want to win this contract, I need to be cheaper than everybody else. And it often doesn't work that way, because to your client or your prospect, the price that you're charging is a signal of the quality that you think you deliver to them. And so if you kind of think about it like, think about a CEO going into his team and saying, hey, I've got this consultant and you guys listen to him. Is that CEO going to say, hey, I got this guy for a steal, he's charging me almost nothing, listen to him, he obviously knows what he's talking about? Probably not. It's more likely going to be like, hey, this woman costs a lot, she obviously knows what she talks about, we're paying a lot of money to have her come in and tell us this stuff. You guys be sure that you listen to her and take her advice, and that's going to help us turn things around. So it can be very counterintuitive, because as a consumer, you're often looking for cheap stuff and, what's the low price, and, you're kind of trying to balance things, and it just doesn't work the same way when you're dealing with business to business transactions. It's not to say that it's impossible to overprice yourself. You certainly can, but I think for most people that are trying to get a foot in the door, a much more real threat is underpricing yourself to the point that you find yourself having to take work that's not a good fit because you just need to keep food on the table.
Yeah. And that goes right back into what Jeremy was also saying earlier about bad clients. If they're pressuring you to be the cheapest, they may not be the client you actually want.
And then I'd want to add on, if that strategy requires you to then provide a premium level of service, which is more than just technical. It's also responding to emails quickly and professionally. It's also understanding the politics of your client. It's also dressing a certain way when you show up and being on time. So if you're going to charge those rates, earn them.
Yeah, and part of that is that, after a certain point in consulting and contracting, you kind of don't want to necessarily be a programmer. You want to be a business consultant that often uses a computer to solve problems for people. And part of that is, and part of stepping your way up to those higher rates is not just asking technical questions, but asking business questions. How is your business structured? How do you get paid? What do your profit margins look like? Where are the worst parts of your profit margin? What soaks up the most part of your profit? Or what would be profit, and how could we take that down so that your profit margin grows? And when you start being able to ask and answer questions like that, you become more valuable to a business than if you're saying, where's your SQL deadlock or something like that. Not that that's not an important problem to solve, but it's of relative less importance to the people that are holding the purse strings than what does this mean to the bottom line type questions.
So I'm going to take one last question from the audience. We've just got a couple minutes, and There's also be a time to make any points you hadn't had a chance to make, or questions you really wanted to answer that you didn't get a chance. But someone asked, what's the number one tool that you use for business other than email? Any answers to that?
I'm gonna throw something out there which may have everyone else laugh at me. Excel. I use Excel a lot. I tried using a lot of other third-party things, and they just sort of didn't fit my personal business model. But I use Excel for a lot of things. Maybe I put this guys out there that you should be ashamed of that, but you really shouldn't. There's a lot of information that you're packing in, and being a programmer, we're all lucky if we have a little app that we want to, like some sort of way that we want to interact with reports or something like that. We just build a little app ourselves and do one. So freelancing as a programmer makes things easier, I guess, in that way.
I went out and got Harvest.
Yeah, Harvest.
Sorry.
Yeah, he was thinking along the lines of like a Kanban board. But yeah, Harvest is a good one. Trello.
Harvest for invoicing and timesheets, which ends up being something that's easy to lose track of.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll let anybody else answer that question, and then just go around and again make any last minute comments because we are at 12:30 right now.
Yeah, I would say Slack.
Yeah.
I always try to set up a shared Slack channel with all my clients, and that way we can have good communication, all the time throughout a project, because communication is key to keeping expectations in line.
Yep. Anybody else have a last minute thought you want to add?